Thanks for listening to the Replatform podcast, sponsored by Crown Peak and Elastic Path and hosted by me, James Gerd. Warm welcome if it's your first time. We put a lot of time and effort into creating this content. Help us keep the podcast completely free for everybody and get access to amazing guests and interesting content. Refer us to people in your network, let them know the podcast exists. You can boost our posts on social media. We mainly post on LinkedIn. The best thing you do to help is give us our show a rating wherever you are listening or watching. So let me set up our latest episode. We are talking about our Elastic Path's new product strategy and market positioning. So one of the key things we love to do on this podcast is keep track of where all the big vendors are going, what's changing, their go-to-market strategies, product releases, etc. It's a really interesting episode again today. We'll look at what the role of a modern e-com platform is under the hood of Elastic Path's new product strategy, and then looking at some of the product roadmap areas. And really happy today to welcome Brian House to the podcast. He's the Chief Experience Officer. How are you doing, Brian?
I'm doing great. Great to be here, James.
Yeah, look, thanks for joining us from rainy Boston. It's a rare occasion when I get to gloat over the weather in London. So before we get into the questions about Elastic Path and the product piece, do you want to give people a bit of a flavour for who you are, your role, and how you would describe Elastic Path to somebody who's coming across it for the first time?
Sure. Yeah, no, happy to. So my title is a unique one. I'm Chief Experience Officer. So essentially, I own all of the touch points with customers after they initially sign on with Elastic Path. So that means I own product management, user experience. I own customer success as well as global services. So when someone signs up to be a customer, they go on a journey with us for some amount of time, and they're interacting with my organizations throughout that whole period.
Cool. Yeah, that's
and then Elastic Path is really, we're a composable commerce platform. We give commerce leaders complete freedom to design, orchestrate, and manage their initiative-specific best for me commerce solutions. And so really what makes us interesting is we allow commerce teams to innovate on their own terms. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means today.
Fantastic. Yeah. And it's part of what we want to do today is to get the perspective of Elastic Path and where they're seeing the market going. Because I think that's really interesting for people listening is how do the big tech companies perceive the market and therefore how is that influencing product strategy? So let's start with that. That thing's a good starting point is how are you and how does Elastic Path see the e-commerce platform needs of merchants and how it's evolving? Like what are the pain points that you are seeing with e-commerce stacks that you're obviously now trying to solve?
Sure. I think the biggest pain point that we're seeing is sort of this need for flexibility. The e-commerce market has been evolved for the last few decades, right? It's a mature market. But one of the sort of patterns that we've seen, it's interesting given the name of your podcast, is the vendors have trained the market to take advantage of new innovation. You need to do a lift and shift from all your commerce capabilities onto a new platform, right? And so and we've seen sort of large leaps in innovation from the commerce platform, which might have justified that in the past. And I think what's happening now in 2024 is organizations are a lot more digitally mature. The application development has evolved pretty significantly. And so customers are looking to narrow their focus and sort of sidestep this whole idea is I need to re-platform as my buy-in to solve problems for my merchandisers, for my commerce business. And so this ability, what we see companies being much more focused on is the jobs to be done and the problems to be solved rather than, hey, I need to rip and replace all the things that I do from a commerce perspective because I want to do some new thing that, vendor X offers. And so that sort of narrowed focus is really, what we see driving purchase decisions today and really what customers are interested in. And not surprisingly, we've seen product management get much more focused on jobs to be done. That same framework and philosophy is happening on the buyer side as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've definitely seen this, the mindset shift from we need to re-platform every 3 to 5 years to why are we? there must be a better way of building out a technology stack that can react without having to do a massive rip and replace and £1 million plus capex every few years. So yeah, that resonates. One thing I really want to drill into, because Elastic Path was one of the early proponents of describing what composable commerce was, and I think we've got lots of terminology. We've had headless. You've got the Math Alliance, microservices, APIs. I think composable, from my experience of working with lots of different merchants, mainly SMEs, but also into large enterprise, composable was the bit that people found really hard to get a grip for what it really meant and how you'd start and what that journey would look like. So I'd love to hear from you, because I now know that you're evolving your product strategy. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But some of the information I've seen come out from James, for example, saying that composable is not the full picture, and maybe it's not the right way to pin your hat on. Why does Elastic Path think then that composable commerce is not really landing and giving people the vision that they need?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think, I'm not sure if I would argue that composable commerce isn't landing, is I just think because in reality, composable is really a term that defines modern application development, right? AWS is the perfect composable architecture. You had this big monolithic system that 20 years ago, they broke into microservices, and now you assemble them based on what your needs are, right? And so I think if anything, in the commerce space, given that there's this interesting dichotomy between sort of business buyers and stakeholders in the commerce platform and technical buyers, I think it makes a lot of sense on the technical side. I don't think it maybe it isn't grokked on the business side as much, because they're focused on, hey, I have a problem to solve. And so a little bit of our idea around this idea of unplatforming goes to what we said before. It's about narrowing the focus and solving problems, but it's built on this foundation of composability and composable application development. But it's really about identifying what's the right tool for the job, and how do I provide a connective tissue to connect all those tools together into a functioning application ecosystem. It's funny, I was talking to Gartner earlier, and they published a report a few years ago, sort of evolving the digital commerce ecosystem, and they had this great picture. I refer to it all the time. It's the digital commerce application ecosystem. It's got 50 different technologies in it, but a commerce platform only does 4 things, right? Products and catalogs, bundles, and or baskets and promotions, card and checkout, and accounts, right? And so everything else is usually some other set of capabilities. And I think that what's happened in the market is, historically, in order to take advantage of innovation in some of those things, sort of monolithic technologies would have to build capabilities in all of these areas, right? And what we've seen is this commoditization of that, right? So now there are vendors that do features that are in more monolithic, sort of historically monolithic platforms. And secondly, it's all about assembling these components, the right tools for the job for your business, is where the value of sort of the unplatform and this idea of composable commerce, our vision of it, really comes together. And that's why that foundation of, hey, you're buying into a prospect is buying into this idea, I'm going to pick the right tools for my business, and how quickly can I assemble those pieces, connect them together, and then build the experiences that make sense for my business objectives. That's really at the heart of what an unplatform is, in our opinion.
Crown Peak, enabling organizations to build meaningful digital experiences for everyone, everywhere. Engage your customers with our content management system. Reach your entire audience with our digital accessibility and quality tools, and grow your brand with our product discovery solution. Find out more at crownpeak.com.
I have to say that I think the phrase, you're right, technology audience, I think a more intuitive business audience, the core business audience, I mean, e-com managers who aren't technology driven e-com managers, but more trader managers. Composable bit, just as a terminology, just hasn't landed. It isn't as clear in their heads as things like headless for some reason. And I think the word you just said, component, is the one Ken talk about. I think people get the idea of components that have interoperability, but components that have independencies. That seems to help people structure much better. And it leads me on to my next question, which is what I see a lot more in the market is not just we don't want to have to re-platform every 3 to 5 years, but we don't want to have to do, if we're doing a big project, we don't all in one go. It's not this massive release where it takes 12 months to get there.
Really?
We will phase it, and we're avoiding big bang, rip and shift. It's right, okay, maybe we're going to sort out the checkout and cart functionality, and that's part of the project. And we've gone to a new ecom platform just on that for the starter. Do you think this is being driven by the advancements in the technology capabilities that you've outlined? Or is it just businesses evolving to be smarter, or both? Like, what do you think is driving that different approach?
Well, I do think technology plays a critical role, right? The technical underpinnings to enable you to do sort of what's often referred to as a strangler pattern or a phased approach to an implementation didn't exist 10, 15 years ago, right? We all worked with those platforms, and you couldn't break them down. And what we see is sort of the legacy monolithic platforms are now trying to make their products more composable because people have sort of force fit new search engines to it, or new front ends on it, or new merchandising capabilities into that, because the standard out of the box ones didn't meet their needs and didn't help them create unique experiences, right? So they did it through force and sheer will. Now those platforms are a lot more sort of standard API interfaces, microservices based, and doing those things. So I think that I think there's technology is a big driver of that, but I also think there's an understanding, a deepening understanding of how all the pieces come together, the components, right? Like if you're a business merchandiser, you're looking at Google Analytics, you're looking at different ad metrics tools to track return on ad spend. You're working at in your PIM or your product experience management solution. You're working in 5 or 6 different technologies to do your day-to-day job, which is, sort of revenue merchandising, increase order value, move inventory, right? But you probably wouldn't think of that as a composable day-to-day life, right? But in effect, that's the same thing, right? And it's just, composable gets wound up in so much sort of technical jargon, and I'm guilty of that as much as anyone, because that's, as I said, it's such a core philosophy of application development. I'm a big believer in sort of the Jeff Lawson school of build or die, right? It's not build or buy anymore, right? And so at the heart of that is the interoperability layer between all of these applications that enables you to build sort of composable architecture. So I think it's just, I think it's more, composable is a term you would use as a developer or a technical buyer. But business users have been doing this similar approach for years. They just don't call it composable. It's called getting my job done.
Yeah, I think this is where it comes down to. It's the semantics often of how phrases are interpreted and whether they're relevant to people. There was John Williams from Amplience did a really nice mini video recently about a composer, wrote a blog about saying that too many people have mistaken composable as an architectural solution rather than a strategic direction. I think that's a really nice positioning. But
yeah.
So let's come on to it, because you're, Elastic Paths, you've just announced your new product strategy, and we'll come into what that really means in a minute. But Unplatform is a terminology you're using. So I'm going to do my devil's advocate here as a consultant, which sounds like another marketing buzzword that's being chucked into the marketplace. But I get the principle behind it. That makes perfect sense. And I guess terminology is needed to pin things together. But can you just for people listening, what does Elastic Path really mean by this in terms of systems architecture? Is anything fundamentally different to how you've built your platform previously? Or is this more trying to align with operationally how e-commerce teams are thinking and behaving?
I think there's a couple of things here. I mean, what we've done is we've taken a number of services, right? This is the beauty of sort of a microservice-based architecture. We've made them independently consumable. So there's definitely some systems architecture components to it, so you don't have to use all the things to unlock the capabilities of PXM or EP payments or what have you, right? It's not all binary decision, if you will. But I think so much of this is really about really goes to this idea of what are the problems to be solved, right? So this is around the day-to-day lives of e-commerce teams, of where are their challenges, and how do we help them address problems. And so I think that falls more into the operational implications of this for teams. Look, I think what's nice about a term like Unplatform is it provides a unique rallying cry that is identifiable, and it gives our customers the ability to talk a little bit about how what their approach is, right? Because we certainly understand we sell software to companies, and then our champions have to go sell that internally, right? And so a little bit is creating a lingua franca for them to talk about what it is that they're trying to achieve and how they're going to address their unique business challenges. So I think the answer sits in between the two of them. So certainly, the tech piece, which allows these services to be consumed independently, is an important piece of it, but it really goes beyond, how the mechanics of how you connect all these and to create this connective tissue, if you will, in terms of how all these pieces come together within an organization. We were talking to a customer a few months ago, and it sort of nailed it for me, which was they showed their sort of current architecture, and there was 25 boxes on it. And across those 25 boxes, there were 19 different technologies. And their commerce platform was sort of a legacy commerce platform, one that, a vendor like us would refer to as monolithic, and it was in like 10 of the boxes. So part of me is like, all application development is sort of composable by nature, because every organization's using, there's no single technology for commerce. But B, it also highlighted the risk associated with, swapping out the commerce platform, right? You're taking out making changes to half of those boxes. If you're a risk, concerned decision maker, you're like, why do I want to solve all of those problems? I just want to take out 2 or 3 of those, or I have a problem in box A, merchandising or bundling or what have you. How do I solve that problem, right? And earn the right to take out more boxes in there. And I think that's at the heart of what the sort of Unplatform is it provides the mechanics by which you do that.
Elastic Path is on a mission to break through the barriers that prevent commerce leaders from delivering extraordinary shopping experiences. Both business and tech teams are able to innovate on their own terms, fully embrace composability, and in turn, never compromise on what's possible. Learn more at www.elasticpath.com.
And you've mentioned connective tissue a few times in terms of like phrasing for describing the interconnectivity. Let's explore that in terms of what that really means. Like, is this the same is this basically open APIs and microservices, or is there something fundamentally different in terms of what you mean from an architectural point of view?
I think we are referring to APIs and microservices. One of the things that we've built, and it's at the heart of our solution, is a product we call Composer, or service we call Composer, and really what that is it's a commerce informed iPaaS, integration platform as a service. So it's taking advantage of the APIs and microservices, but it's simplifying the whole process for connecting all these components. And so that's, I think one of the things that we see is, when we go to large events or talk to analysts or whatever, composability is an important story that everyone's interested in, but it introduces a level of complexity that many organizations that certainly aren't as digitally mature is sort of the highest organizations get concerned about. And so really what this connective tissue that we offer through our Composer service is about simplifying the process of connecting all of these pieces. And so that's what we refer to as connective tissue. Lots of platforms have APIs. It's the process for actually making that all, connecting all those pieces that make sense. So as an example, a tangible example is Composer provides all of the underlying infrastructure from the cloud ops, DevOps perspective to manage those connections, right? So if you were, your choices as a commerce application developer are, I'd have to, create the integration, spin it up on a Lambda somewhere, run it as a serverless function, maintain the connectivity and track both the APIs on either side of it. So if there's any changes to the APIs, I have to upgrade my integration. I have to scale that integration from a serverless function perspective based on demand. And now I'm in the business of managing all of that over time, right? And I don't have one integrations. Like I said, that we talked to a company that had 19 integrations in their commerce stack, right? So that's suddenly a lot of infrastructure to manage. It's not in your core competency. That's just to turn on your commerce application. So Composer enables you to offload all of that to us, right? So we manage the infrastructure that runs those connections. We give you parameters to tweak how much data runs through that at a given time, to focus on sort of performance, functionality, trade-offs, what have you. But we make that's what we talk about when we're talking about the connective tissue, is providing all of that as a service. So that way we take the integration burden off of the customer, right? Because what's happened over the evolution of commerce and these first few waves of it was, in a monolithic system, all that integration burden lived with the vendor. The vendor just did it on their own. Now in sort of this wave of sort of composable architectures, all of that shifts over to the customer. So we're taking that back and solving that problem in a different way by providing a cloud infrastructure for all that integration work.
Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense from that old dev and WebOps layer point of view, which I guess it's all about simplifying and speeding up projects. And similar to, I would say then, the platforms that are truly headless, who have given people almost like a front end framework for building out a headless store without having to build everything custom from scratch, from the ground up. So I say similar sort of principles, speeding up projects, which most of my clients, whenever I speak to them, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for that speed and simplicity.
Sure. Well, actually, just one more point I want to make on that. When we look at Composer, we look at those integrations from our own experience implementing projects ourselves or with our partners. Oftentimes those are like 4 or 6 week projects to do those, right? So suddenly now I've got an instant on integration, or I've got a low code environment to do that, and I can do that in hours or a couple days. That's real cost savings, in addition to all of sort of the web op, dev op, back end pieces. So that's one of the reasons why we're so bullish on this as a core component of sort of a composable strategy.
So that leads me nicely on to the question about the kind of, I guess, the reframing of the product strategy, which you've just recently announced. What I'd really love to know is from a merchant's point of view, what has changed, or how has that product changed? And can you give us a few practical examples of what it might mean for people using the platform?
Sure. So for our current customers, there's really no change at all. They utilize the platform the way they always have. I think for organizations that are considering Elastic Path, what it does is twofold, as we've been talking about. One is it narrows the decision criteria, so it saves them from a replatform, right? So they don't have to create their 300-line RFP and go through a procurement process and all of that. They can get started much quicker because they can focus on a narrow set of problems. And they can, I think the more important piece, right, whenever you're doing new technology is how quickly do I realize value from this? How quickly can this impact my business? And so, I think the biggest thing that I'm excited about, knowing, given that I own customer success and global services, is I'm trying to accelerate that time to value realization, because I know the faster that our customers start to receive, see value on a day-to-day basis and impact on their business, the more likelihood that we can earn the right to then start to talk about other strategic initiatives, other problems to solve. And this goes back to, as we were talking, the phased approach to implementation. I don't think there's any surprise here, but it's about de-risking the whole process of adopting a new commerce platform, and how do I accelerate time to value? In periods of economic uncertainty, one of the things we've seen is initiatives and appetite for initiatives has gotten a lot smaller in our customer base. And so the question is, how do you align your product strategy to the sort of reforecast appetites, if you will? So that's probably been the biggest change. Plus, from a branding perspective, it feels so much fresher and newer. And so the reaction of that has been very positive too. So which has been great.
Cool. And I know we talked a bit about Composer. So the other part, the part of the product I'd really like to drill into a bit is CX Studio. So a lot of businesses I work with will fall into, or business will generally fall into two camps. One where they are looking for content management capabilities and content orchestration out of a platform rather than having to get a separate CMS, and others who come in with what I've got a third-party CMS, a headless CMS, and actually I just need a platform that can connect it. So I'd love you to break down the CX Studio offer in terms of what model does it work with? Is this a native CMS, page builder, visual editor, or is it about the ability to connect CMSs into Elastic Path through like that connective tissue you talked about?
Sure. So CX Studio is a front end as a service. So I wouldn't call it a CMS. My background's in the CMS space. I worked at a company, Acquia, that was a enterprise vendor for the open source Drupal CMS. So CX Studio is not intending to compete with Drupal or Adobe Experience Manager or anything like that. It's a CMS or Contentful or any of the others. But it's really about that front end service. So it's so what it's nice is it can integrate with the CMS. It provides sort of visual editing capabilities for and page building capabilities, and it's really about that sort of rapid cycle front end development. One of the things that I saw years ago at Acquia was so many of my customers had much more investment in their front end development teams, because part of what they were trying to create on their experiences, their customers touch and saw, was moving at a pace much faster than the CMS, technologies themselves. And so they invested in front end development because that's where they could innovate and move quickly to create differentiated experiences. And so, we look at front end as a service, and CX Studio is a similar pace to accelerate that pace of innovation to help drive business objectives. So, it's a really interesting technology. What we're finding in the problem to be solved sort of approach to talking to new prospects and customers is there's lots of challenges on the front end, right? Their demands on the merchandiser far exceed their ability to execute those. And so, a product like CX Studio becomes a great landing point to get started with the technology. It can fit very nicely with your existing commerce platform or content platform, and then gives the ability to quickly launch and build and launch new pages to drive outcomes. One of the things that we're really excited about is it's very much a data. There's a really solid data play within CX Studio that complements what merchandisers are doing day to day. So there's personalization and dynamic content. You can create custom content blocks on the pages and personalize those, and that personalization persists as someone navigates between the core site and these landing pages. We provide a bunch of analytics and integrate with CDPs like Klaviyo and a bunch of analytics pieces. So you get aggregated analytics across all of those tools, and we allow you to run multiple tests at the same time. on the same page. So, really giving merchandisers a lot of flexibility to how do they optimize for conversions on those pages. But so there's a whole bunch here with CX Studio, but I think the biggest piece is that it really does sort of deliver on the promise of Unplatform, in that it's designed to solve a specific set of problems for a specific persona. It makes it easy for them to realize value around those problems very quickly, deliver results, and then sort of, and obviously build a relationship with Elastic Path over time.
So if I understand that correctly, then so it's commerce engine agnostic. So you can use CX Studio for the front end, but you could be on a different shopping cart. You don't have to be using Elastic Path's commerce engine.
Yeah, correct. Today it works with Shopify and with Elastic, works with Shopify and Elastic Path, and we're looking to build additional connectors to other commerce platforms, right? So again, to the thread of our discussion is it's not about moving. Doesn't require you to move to Elastic Path to do all these interesting things on the front end just to get started.
Yeah, it's nice, and I've seen that approach in some other larger technology companies where the modularization of those components means that customers who might be looking for a long-term migration to a bigger stack can go with a simpler approach up front, which is, I'm not moving my legacy e-commerce because that is a really complex isolate and retire project. It will take years, but actually I can move to more like nimble and agile front end as phase one. Then maybe I add in some like merchandising capabilities, then I gradually transition. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. That's, and that's what we think at the heart of Unplatform is the vision of what replatforms look like in the future, right? You earn a vendor like us earns the right to solve the next problem and the next problem. And at some point, you may have updated your commerce infrastructure altogether, but it's not, high risk, high, jobs on the line kind of project that it too often is today.
Yeah, and it's also, I much prefer the commercial models around this approach to product is so much more in tune with how like e-commerce businesses and the finance teams are thinking, because it's pay for what you're using rather than pay for a license for an entire platform where you might only use 40% of that ecosystem, and that lends to people getting fed up because they're burning money on things that they're not useful because they've got specialist third parties replace it. Yeah, interesting. So let's come back to my final question. Yeah, final question is around product roadmap. So obviously there's been a lot of strategic thinking sits behind, where you're going with these different products and these components and this Unplatform like go-to-market strategy. What's happening with the roadmap? Like, what are some of the big things that have happened recently? What's coming up in the future that merchants can get excited about?
Sure. So I think of late, a couple of things that have been big for us have certainly been EP payments. So getting into the payment space and offering a solution there, right? One of the things that we find with merchants is their relationships with their payments provider are, it's easy to be stuck as a small fish in a big ocean. And so you don't get the attention you need from a support and operations perspective around payments. And so we've seen a lot of adoption of EP payments around that, having a better relationship with their payment vendor. The second thing is multi-store management. So we've introduced a solution there. We have a customer who's running more than 500 stores today on our multi-store management solution. And so, as I mentioned, I come from the CMS space. We saw, a world where everyone was trying to, shrink the number of websites down into just one website at a time when the ease at which it was to spin up a website was exploding. And so organizations would have hundreds, if not thousands of websites. We think a similar thing's going to happen in commerce, right? And so there's a common infrastructure with that, but there's lots of reasons to spin up stores, whether they're pop-up events or for your network of dealers or franchisees or what have you. And so we've created a multi-store management solution that's built on the underpinnings of our product experience manager. So products and catalogs sit at the heart of that, which we think is a better approach to addressing the multi-store management problem. So we're really excited about that. And then coming up for us in a similar vein is we're working on a subscription service. Again, it'll be an independent product. You can purchase it alone, but it builds a lot on the foundations of PXM and EP payments. Because what we're seeing is more and more companies, it used to be sort of this hard line between sort of I sell a product that's a subscription product, or I sell physical goods or one-time purchase goods. Now we're seeing more and more companies that sell one-time purchase goods also add subscription offerings to get more predictable revenue streams, to utilize it to move inventory, excess inventory. And so, that combination of supporting both purchase models and purchase motions for your consumers is something we're really, really bullish about. And so the subscription service is something we're very excited about. So those are the big things.
Surprised.
And we're doing a bunch with with customer data, and we've got some integrations and some partnerships with some in the CDP space that we're really excited about. So we're doing some really interesting things there as sort of the whole network of the whole market around customer data is changing so quickly, right? So it's important to merchandisers. We offer Klaviyo integration into CX Studio, but we think there's a bigger role for that in the commerce place going forward as brands seek to own more of their customer data and providing tools to capture that and act on that in your commerce experiences directly.
Interesting. That's why I love watching the product roadmaps develop. It's always a fun thing to voyeuristically keep an eye on in the market. Brian, that's all the questions I wanted to answer. I mean, we're going for hours probing into more detailed product strategy stuff and product updates. I'm sure there will be future episodes on these areas, but thanks so much for taking the time to come on and share your insights around where Elastic's headed.
Great, James. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you.
Cool, and thanks everyone for listening. Keep your ear open for our next episode. We drop one every week, and don't forget to give us that rating wherever you're listening or watching before you go. Thanks everybody. Until next week, take care. For more information on this topic, head over to replatform.fm for our audio podcasts. To discuss a project, or if you'd like to chat about any of the topics covered in this episode in more detail, please reach out to myself, James Gurd, or my co-host, Paul Rogers, via LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks again for listening, and keep your ears peeled for the next episode.